I wasn't planning on staying in Red Hollow. I wasn't planning on stopping at all. I was 29, driving through a stretch of rural farmland in southern Kentucky on my way to see my brother when the check engine light came on. The car started shaking like something was grinding underneath, and the next thing I knew, I was coasting onto the shoulder with steam leaking from under the hood. The nearest town on my GPS was Red Hollow, population 312. No gas station icons, just a tiny dot surrounded by miles of fields and old roads. I didn't have a better option, so I grabbed my coat and walked. The village looked like a place time had given up on. Houses sat far apart with long, empty yards. A single gravel road cut through the center and led to a small general store, a boarded-up school, and a smashed mailbox someone had duct-taped back together. I went into the general store first. The bell above the door gave a weak jingle. A man in his 60s stood behind the counter. He didn't greet me. He just stared at my coat, my boots, my face, and said I must be the one whose car gave out. He said it like he'd been expecting me. I asked if there was a mechanic in town. He nodded once and pointed out the window toward a long dirt path running past the old school. "Barn on the hill," he said. "If she's home." "She?" He didn't answer. He sold me a bottle of water and told me not to stay out past dark. I thought it was a weird warning, but small towns have weird people, so I brushed it off. I followed the path. The dirt road wound behind the old schoolyard and up a shallow hill. At the top stood a barn. Not a farm barn, but a large red workshop with a metal roof and a roll-up garage door. One side was covered with old horseshoes nailed into patterns. As I got closer, I noticed something else. A woman stood beside the barn, not working, not walking, just standing perfectly still, with her hands in her coat pockets, her back to me, staring into the fields behind the structure. I cleared my throat. She didn't react. I stepped closer and said hello. She didn't turn around, but she spoke. "You broke down on the main road." Her voice was calm but flat, like she wasn't surprised. I told her yes, and asked if she was the mechanic. She nodded once without facing me. Then she finally turned her head just enough to look over her shoulder. Her eyes looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't have walked here alone," she said. I asked why. She didn't answer. She just motioned me toward the barn and walked inside. The inside was cluttered with tools and spare car parts. Everything smelled like oil and damp wood. She gestured for me to write down where my car was and what happened. I did. Then she told me I could wait inside the barn or go back to town, but not to wander past the fence line behind the property. "People get lost back there," she said quietly. "Some don't come back." I tried laughing it off. She didn't laugh with me. She grabbed a toolbox and headed out without another word. I followed her outside, but she stopped abruptly and stared past me down the hill. "You need to go back," she said. "Now." Her tone changed. The calm, flat voice was gone. This was urgent. Fearful, I turned toward the dirt path. 3 people were walking up the hill. At first, I thought they were hikers. Then I noticed they were walking in a straight line, spaced evenly apart, all looking directly at the barn. No talking, no waving, no expression on their faces, just moving toward us. I asked who they were. She whispered, "Don't let them see where you go. Walk normally. Don't run." My throat tightened. She stepped behind me and nudged my shoulder. "Back to town. Straight there. Don't stop. Don't look back until you reach the store." The urge to run was overwhelming, but her voice was sharp enough to make me obey. I walked, slow, steady. The cold air stung my cheeks as I made my way down the hill. The 3 villagers reached the bottom of the hill as I did. They didn't step aside. They didn't acknowledge me. They just watched me pass. Their eyes didn't blink. I felt their stares burning into the back of my neck as I kept walking. Every instinct told me to sprint. After what felt like an hour, I reached the general store. The clerk was still behind the counter. He saw my expression and shut the door behind me quickly. "You went up there," he said under his breath. "Not a question. What is going on?" I demanded. He didn't answer right away. He rubbed his hands across his face and seemed to debate whether he should tell me anything. Finally, he said, "Some folks don't take kindly to outsiders. They watch. They wait. They try to keep track of who comes through. Best not to cross their paths after sundown. Best not to draw their attention at all." Before I could press him for more, the door creaked. One of the 3 villagers walked past the store window, slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on the building as he went by. The clerk exhaled through his nose like he'd been holding his breath. He told me to stay put until morning. He said the mechanic would find my car and fix it by dawn. I didn't sleep. I sat on a plastic chair near the back of the store, listening to the wind rattle the old windows. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the porch outside. Slow, heavy. Someone stopped directly in front of the door. The clerk turned off the lights. We waited in silence. A shadow moved past the glass, then another, and another. I counted 5 silhouettes wandering outside the store. Their boots scraped slowly across the wood planks. None of them knocked. None tried to come in. They just lingered, listening. By sunrise, they were gone. The mechanic came into the store with frost on her coat and said my car was fixed and waiting on the highway. She didn't explain how she got past the villagers. I didn't ask. Before I left, she gave one final warning. If your engine ever dies near a place like this again, stay inside the car. Don't go into the village. And if you see people walking in a line like that, don't let them see you twice. I drove out of Red Hollow without looking back. Now whenever I pass a rural village with wide fields and silent houses, I watch the tree lines carefully. Because somewhere out there are people who walk toward strangers in perfect lines, at the same pace, with the same blank expression. And whatever they want, the rest of the village chooses to keep quiet about it. My name is Austin Price, and 3 years ago, I spent 6 months in a tiny rural village I still cannot drive past without feeling sick. I am not exaggerating when I say that place changed the way I look at quiet towns and friendly neighbors forever. The village was called Miller Ridge. You would miss it if you blinked on the highway. 1 gas station, 1 diner, a small church, and about 20 houses that looked older than my parents. I moved there because rent was cheap, and I had landed a seasonal job at a factory 15 minutes away. I figured it would be peaceful. My rented place sat at the very end of Miller Road, where the pavement turned into gravel, and finally into a dirt track that disappeared into trees. My house was small but decent enough. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a porch that faced the road. Across from me was a field, and beyond that were woods that looked black even in daylight. From the first day, the village felt off. Not obviously bad, just wrong in a way I could not name. People stared too long. Conversations died when I walked into the diner. The woman at the gas station asked a lot of questions about how long I planned to stay and if anyone knew exactly where I was living. I laughed it off. Small town curiosity. The first real warning sign came on my 3rd night. I was lying in bed with the window cracked when I heard footsteps outside in the gravel. Slow ones. Someone walking past my house. Then they stopped right under the bedroom window. I lay very still and listened. No talking, no movement, just breathing. Low and steady, close enough that I heard it through the screen. After a full minute, I finally worked up the nerve to get up and look. I turned the lamp on and yanked the curtain back. No one was there. The yard was empty. The next morning, I checked the dirt under the window. Footprints. Clear prints leading from the road to the spot under my window and back again. Boots, not shoes. I tried to convince myself it was a drunk neighbor taking a shortcut, but there was no reason for anyone to cut through my yard. There was nowhere to go but trees. I mentioned it to the landlord, an older guy named Frank who lived near the church. He shrugged and said some of the locals wandered at night. When I asked who, he changed the subject and told me to keep my doors locked. After that, I started paying more attention. There was an old man who sat in a lawn chair near the gas station every day. He never seemed to buy anything. He just watched cars. Whenever I passed on my way to work, he tracked me with his eyes without waving. The woman who owned the diner, Mary, always asked what shifts I worked, morning or night. When I told her I had switched to nights for overtime, she frowned and said it was better to be home before midnight out there. I asked why. She just said the roads were bad and the woods confused people. I thought they were all just odd. Then Halloween rolled into November, the factory cut my hours, and I started noticing lights in the woods across from my house. They first appeared around 2 in the morning, small yellow dots weaving between the trees. At first I thought it was kids with flashlights, but they moved too slowly. Sometimes they would stop and stay in one place for 10 or 15 minutes, then blink out. One Friday night, I finally cracked my window and listened. The air was cold and still. In the distance, I heard voices, not clear enough to make out words, just a low murmur. No laughter, no shouting, a steady sound like people talking under their breath. I watched one of the lights drift closer to the edge of the field. It stopped at the tree line and stayed there. After a while, the light angled down as if whoever held it had turned it toward the ground. The next morning, I walked out to the spot. There were tire tracks I had never noticed before, deep grooves that came out of the trees, cut across the field, and stopped halfway to the road. Boot prints were everywhere, some bigger, some smaller, going back and forth between the track and the woods. In the middle of that churned-up dirt was a square patch that looked freshly dug and filled in again. I took a step closer and caught a smell that made me back away fast. Damp earth, old leaves, and something sweet and rotten underneath. I told myself it was an animal. Someone had buried a dog. That was all. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in the dark living room, lights off, staring out at the field. Around 1:30, the lights appeared again between the trees. This time there were more of them, 4 or 5 at least. They moved in a slow line across the field toward that same patch. I saw shapes behind them now, dark forms in long coats. No one talked this time. The lights surrounded the patch. One by one they tilted down and went out, like everyone there had knelt at the same time. My heart was hammering. I fumbled for my phone, thinking I would record it, but my hand froze when something else happened. A pair of headlights turned onto Miller Road from the highway. A car I did not recognize. It drove slowly past my house toward the end of the road. Toward the field, whoever was driving must have seen the people there because the brake lights flashed. The car slowed. Every light in the field shut off at once. For a second, everything was black. Then, a single flashlight snapped back on, aimed straight at the approaching car. The car stopped completely. I could not see the driver from where I was, but I imagined them squinting into the beam, confused. The light held steady for a long time. Then other lights clicked on behind it, forming a line. The car stayed there another few seconds. Then the reverse lights came on and it backed away, turning around in a hurried arc, tires throwing snow. It sped back down toward the highway and vanished. The next morning, the car was parked outside the gas station. I recognized the plate. It belonged to a guy named Ben who I had seen around, maybe mid-30s, lived a few roads over. He was inside talking quietly to the clerk when I went in for coffee. His hand shook as he held the cup. When our eyes met, he stared at me like he wanted to say something, then looked away. That night, the footsteps by my window came back, heavier this time. I sat in bed holding a flashlight, listening to someone move slowly around the house, pausing at each door and window. I called the county sheriff from my cell phone and whispered what was happening. The dispatcher said they would send a car, but it might be a while. The footsteps drifted toward the back of the house. The back door handle rattled once, twice, then the sound stopped. I waited, breath held, until headlights finally swept down Miller Road. By the time the deputy pulled into my drive, the yard was empty. He walked the perimeter with his beam, found the boot prints, followed them to the field. I went with him, wrapped in my coat, teeth chattering. The freshly filled patch was partly dug up again, not fully, just disturbed. The deputy shone his light on it, and his face tightened. He told me to go back inside. 2 days later, there were sheriff cars and a coroner van in the field. Word spread fast, even in a village that pretended not to gossip. Ben from down the road had gone missing. His car sat in his drive, but he was gone. I never found out what they dug up. Rumors bounced around the diner. An old well, animal bones, trash. Everyone suddenly had a theory. What I know is this. That night, after the cars left and the field went dark again, a single figure stood at the edge of the trees. No light in his hand, just a man in a coat, watching my house from the shadows. I saw him when lightning flashed far off over the ridge. It lit the field for less than a second, but in that moment, his face was turned directly toward my window. I moved out a week later. I told the landlord my job had ended. He did not argue, did not ask why. He just handed me my deposit and said quietly that Miller Ridge was not for everyone. Now, whenever a friend suggests a cabin in a quiet village or a rental in some peaceful little community out in the country, I think about those lights in the trees and the fresh dirt in that field. Cities have their dangers, but at least in a city you can see most of what wants to hurt you. In a place like Miller Ridge, the danger watches from dark windows and tree lines, and the whole village agrees not to talk about what happens after midnight on Miller Road. My name is Derek Hall, and the village I'm about to tell you about is a place I will never set foot in again. I wasn't traveling. I wasn't lost. I actually meant to be there. My cousin had invited me to stay a few days in his rural hometown of Windmere Crossing, a tiny farming community tucked between miles of cornfields and aging barns. I had visited him before in bigger cities, but never in the place he grew up. He always joked that Windmere Crossing was the kind of town where the dogs knew everyone by name and where nothing bad ever happened. He left out the things the locals didn't talk about. I arrived in the late afternoon just as the sun was dropping behind long rows of fields. His house sat near the eastern edge of the village, where the corn thinned out into rolling pasture. The place was quiet. Too quiet. No cars, no kids, no dogs barking, just a stillness that didn't feel natural. When I knocked, my cousin Owen swung the door open like he'd been waiting behind it. He hugged me, dragged my bag inside, and started talking fast. Too fast, asking about my drive, work, my parents, anything except the town. During dinner, I mentioned how empty everything looked outside. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. He forced a smile and said people kept to themselves after dark. Then he changed the subject again. That was the first odd moment. The second came later, after he went to bed and I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The village had turned pitch black. No porch lights. No street lamps, not even the faint glow of televisions through windows. It was like the entire town had gone to sleep at the exact same minute. I stood on the porch listening. Nothing. No wind, no insects, no distant cars. Just a low hum in the air like an engine running far off. Then the phone poles along the road creaked. Just once. All at the same time. I went back inside and locked the door. The next morning, Owen avoided talking about the town again. We ate breakfast and he walked me into the village center. It looked normal in daylight. A few locals waved. A truck rolled past. A dog trotted along the ditch. But people avoided looking directly at me. And when they did, their smiles came slow and strange, like they weren't smiling because they wanted to, but because they needed to. Outside the small market, an old man sitting on a milk crate nodded at me. His eyes were sharp and glassy. "Don't stay out tonight," he muttered. Before I could ask why, Owen grabbed my shoulder and steered me away. He laughed it off, said the old guy drank too much. But the third strange moment happened that afternoon. A woman from across the street stood on her porch watching me. No expression, hands at her sides, staring without blinking. When I waved politely, she stepped back into her doorway without turning around. Not walking backward, sliding backward. I told myself this town was just different. That night around 10, the storm rolled in. Heavy rain and wind that rattled the windows. The lights flickered twice. Then everything went out. I stepped into the hall calling for Owen, but he didn't answer. His bedroom door was open. The bed was empty. I checked the bathroom, the kitchen, the back porch. Nothing. The house felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Too still, too cold, like the power outage had drained all warmth with it. Then I noticed something outside. Every house on the road was dark except one. A small farmhouse halfway down the block had its upstairs window glowing faint yellow. A person stood in the window, a silhouette, perfectly still, facing the street, facing me. I stepped back from the glass. My phone had no signal. The landline had no dial tone. The hum from the night before returned deeper this time, a low vibration rolling beneath the floorboards. I crept to the living room and peeked through the blinds. 3 people were standing in the road, not talking, not moving, just standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the house. I couldn't see their faces, just dark shapes, rain beating against their coats. I backed away from the window slowly. Something bumped against the back door, a soft thud. Then another. Someone whispered my name, not loud, through the crack beneath the door. Derek. The voice wasn't Owen's. I clamped a hand over my mouth and eased toward the hallway. The bumping shifted to the front door now, slow, testing the edges. The hum grew louder. It vibrated the floor, the walls, my chest, and then every phone in the house rang. All at once. The cordless, the landline, even my dead cell phone lit up and buzzed. I knew instinctively not to answer. The ringing cut off abruptly, and the house went silent. Then the upstairs floorboards creaked. One slow step. Another. I didn't wait to find out who or what was in the hallway above me. I ran out the back door into the storm, slipping in the mud, sprinting barefoot across the wet grass. The moment I hit the road, the humming stopped. The lights in the farmhouse window blinked out. The 3 figures in the street turned in unison and walked calmly away into the rain. I didn't stop running until I reached the general store. The clerk stepped outside holding a shotgun and waved me in fast. Before I could explain anything, he said, "You shouldn't have been outside when the lines died." I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. At sunrise, Owen walked into the store, soaking wet like he'd been out all night. He acted confused and claimed he had gotten up to check the breaker box and slipped in the mud, knocking himself out. He didn't remember anything after. I left Windmere Crossing that morning. I didn't stay for explanations. I never got any anyway. To this day, I don't know what happens in that village when the phone lines go quiet. I don't know why everyone goes still, or why they stand out in the road like sleepwalkers waiting for something to arrive. I only know that when the lights died and the air began to hum, the whole village reacted like they had lived through it many times, and I was the only one who didn't know the rules.